This is the fifth of the Fiducia recorded webinars looking at how DLT technology can help advertising publishers understand where money goes in the programmatic supply chain. Today, we're going to look at why the buy and sell side should participate in the network. To help me discuss this subject, I have with me Phill Hayman, who is a member of the founding team at Fiducia and head of client success. He's worked in advertising for over 15 years with roles at publishers and ad tech businesses, including The Telegraph, Exponential, and IAS. Welcome, Phill.
Hi.
So, diving straight in, the buy and sell side have different aims when approaching marketing. And when it comes to the DLT network, it's no different. Can you give me an overview of what the opportunity for each side is when getting involved?
Sure. So maybe just it's worth just talking about some of the shared benefits firstly. And there are very different benefits for publishers and the supply side and the sell side. But if you think about the reconciled supply chain data, that's one of the key benefits for all parties. And everyone has access to that single source of truth and that reconciled data through the supply chain. I think just generally, accountability and transparency is obviously a big topic at the moment, and the network offers the ability to deliver that accountability or create more accountability amongst partners. And that's kind of not forgetting, once the data is inside the network, then it becomes immutable. So it's there, it's been stamped for its authenticity, who supplied it. And if you think about the amount of audit and governance work that goes on both sides, through the entire supply chain, then, this kind of reconciled data can be a real benefit to some of those services and some of those processes. And I think finally, just, one thing that we know is an issue is consent and delivery of data to participants in the supply chain is a big problem. We've seen that through our study and various other studies. So a DLT network really offers a solution to streamline the ability of different participants to share data, reconcile data with other participants in the supply chain. But if you kind of look at the benefits on the buy side and the sell side, although they're using the same data source, you see that the benefits are subtly different. So for an advertiser or an agency, it's very much focused on performance and optimization. So if I have the ability to join data together, I can improve my decision-making ability because I have that data reconciled, available, kind of always on, every day. I don't have to work really hard to bring those data sources together to make sense of them. So it's kind of there and kind of front and center for your programmatic and delivery teams. And then you think about the operational benefits as well on the advertising side. So, reconciliation, for bidding purposes or, just for reporting and optimization purposes is a burdensome for many teams. So having that kind of very thin reporting layer, can take away some of that pain. And then it's kind of the reverse on the publisher side and on the supplier side. So, whereas an advertiser is focused on demand path optimization and, using data for those looking down the supply chain, if you're a publisher, then you really want to look up the supply chain for your kind of SPO. So getting that data is traditionally very difficult, getting it in a single format, getting it in a timely fashion. So if publishers can get access to that supply path data, they can manage yield, they can manage CPM, they can manage performance, they can manage discrepancies, in a far more kind of holistic way rather than piecing it together. And, that we think is a real benefit. And also, I think there's a lack of information sometimes that's passed through the supply chain. So if you're interested in the real key campaign KPIs, maybe what settings are applied within a DSP, what settings are applied within a CV tool, all that information can be housed within the DLT network, within what we call a smart contract, and that can be accessed by everyone in the supply chain. So that gives everyone the same campaign information to work with, and really kind of gives a level of transparency that's probably not there at the moment. And then you have, again, those operational efficiencies that can be gained, whether that's in terms of aggregating data, whether that's just, bringing, the time spent, and the better resourcing of your internal, people, to spend time on the things that matter rather than these kind of very manual tasks. And DLT offers that level of automation. But what we have seen is these differences, and the benefits are very, very specific, to your business and to your business goals. So it takes a little bit of teasing out in terms, what the specific benefit is for you. But I think those are the kind of, broadly speaking, the differences.
Okay, great. There's been a pilot running since July. Could you give us an overview of how it went and some of the outputs?
Yes, so the pilot's been running for just over a year now, and we were lucky enough to work with 6 really large advertisers across the majority of the holding groups, and there were 3 key phases to that pilot. So the first phase was around supply chain mapping. So as an advertiser, understanding which of my participants, or which of my which of the supply chain participants could provide log file data. Did those log files have the correct fields and the correct taxonomy that could be matched and reconciled in a network? And who was really capable of participating? Then it was around optimization. So if I have access to this reconciled data in a supply chain, how can I improve my optimization? How can I improve the distribution of my spend? How can I work out kind of what's happening, with this kind of single dashboard or single view on all of my data sources brought together, by the DLT network or within the network. And then it's around the operational benefits. So as a business, across the board, how do I benefit? So where are the benefits for me? Is it cost? Is it time? Is it augmenting an existing workflow or process that, would really benefit from, access to this kind of data source? So we really tried to validate some of these assumptions, based on what these agencies and brands are experiencing in their day-to-day. And there were some kind of critical findings. I'll focus on 3. So the first was 80% of the impressions that we analyzed, we deemed as qualified, and 20% were non-qualified. So we got to that by asking each of those advertisers what represented the ideal criteria to reconcile a campaign with. So if you imagine a typical supply chain where you have an ad server, a DSP, a CV tool, and an SSP, a publisher, and that data is reconciled together by some specific stipulations. And those stipulations could be, they all have a matching auction ID. They all, the CV tool says that the impression was fraud-free. The ad server says that the impression was, the creative actually delivered. And when you put those all together, which of the data sources and which impressions, were actually, reconcilable to those criteria? And the 80 to 20% are the findings. So, and there were lots of reasons for the non-qualification. In some cases, it was a lack of auction ID. In some cases, it didn't meet the brand safety or viewability or fraud requirements. But having this unified view then allowed those advertisers to say, oh, right, I didn't know that X SSP or X publisher, was or wasn't doing something. And, that's really helping them make decisions on a daily basis. Another critical point was the testing of an SDK. And it's worth just touching on the benefits of that and why it's important. So as we know, many parts of the supply chain, maybe don't support an auction ID or a transaction ID. And that's a critical ID in matching and mapping impressions through the supply chain. So as part of the test, we built an SDK and delivered that on the DSP side for advertisers, and then on the publisher side. And that SDK generated a delivery ID, which we then passed into the log files of those particular businesses. We got hold of those log files, and then we could reconcile those impressions, between those 2 platforms, which couldn't have been done before, with the fields that were available in the, natively within those log file feeds. So that was a really important finding and a validation point, because, impressions can be matched. Ideally, there would be a single common identifier that all parties use, but in the event that there is not, it can be done manually if there's a desire on the buy side and through the supply chain to do it.
Okay, some really interesting findings from the pilot. So now the next stage is what's referred to as the MVE, or minimal viable ecosystem. Can you give us an overview of what that looks like?
Yeah, of course. So the minimum viable ecosystem is really a natural extension of the pilot program. So we expect many of those advertisers and participants to continue their engagement into the MVE. And the MVE is really a small scale working version of the network that will have the core functionality. So participants will run a node, for example, and that will give them access to the network. They'll be able to extract data from the network, and that data will be the reconciled unified supply chain data that we discussed earlier. And they'll be able to put that to work, in any of the use cases that we come up with. Really, it's around the technological development of the network. So the pilot we focused on the log file feeds. The MV really focuses on the harmonization automation of those log file feeds, and then the actual benefit to the users. So if you think about the permissioning issues that have been faced, there will be some work that helps solve those. So as a participant in the MV network, you'll be able to decide who you wish to share your data with, and they will then be able to access that data in the network through the MV. So really, it's the surfacing of the technical capacity of the network prior to the full launch that we hope will happen sometime late next year.
Yeah. And so how should a business act, and what's required to get involved with the MVE?
Yeah, so I think that, key is, as a business, you must have an interest in DLT and the potential benefits that it brings, I think. So, it's an innovative technology, and, I'm probably right in saying not many businesses have experienced it yet. So, this creation of a ledger, really can affect different business areas. So, as a first base, it will be good to have participants that are keen to explore and keen to, look at their own internal processes and work out where DLT and access to that data, could augment what they're doing. I think, really in terms of, involvement, they must be technically able to deliver a node, to kind of manage the deployment of a network node, manage the deployment of access to the keys that are required, the secret kind of keys that are required to push data into and pull data from the network. And also the business must be, or must have, or be delivering logs. So whether they're proprietary logs or whether they're logs from your DSP or SSP of choice, as long as you have logs and they have the specific IDs that are required, so a matching ID, then that business can effectively participate in the MVE, individually or as part of a supply chain, with some of those advertisers that are listed above. So, those are the kind of the three real things, an interest in DLT, the ability to deploy and maintain a node, and, whether that business has log files that they commit to the network.
Fantastic. And then finally, could you give us a sense of the costs involved for participating in the network?
Sure. So a lot of the kind of the costing work in terms of, what it will cost the industry to run the network and what it will cost Fiducia to, manage the network from a technical capacity has been done. And so we know that, the figure has to be less than 1% of media spend, and that's for, us to maintain the network and for all participants to extract value from the network. The question that still exists, and this is dealt with, by JICWebs and by now TAG, is, how is that cost likely to be distributed? Is it a buy side cost? Is it a sell side cost? Is there a mechanism for apportioning the cost equally through the supply chain? So TAG will have there will be a governance committee, attached to the DLT network, and that committee will be tasked with, figuring out, how that cost should be apportioned in the network. And, we'd expect the trades and, all the participants and the trades in the business they represent to, to come forward and put their point of view forward. So, there's still work to be done there, but that will be covered in this business design phase that we run, alongside the MVE and ongoing.
Fantastic. Really interesting. Thank you so much for your time, Phill.
Perfect. Thank you very much.